bandwidth.
So we are live on air. Thank you so much. Sorry about the technical issues. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Del Medina, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Avion Ventures. We are a pre-accelerator program specifically created for Latinas. It's an 8-week program, and I'm really excited to have a great friend, an intelligent, sharp person that's going to talk to us a little bit about startup finance. Let me introduce Carmen properly, besides just being a great friend and wonderful colleague. Carmen Palafox is a management consultant with Propina, focused on strategy, business development, and operational efficiency engagements for the US and Latin American firms. She was formerly the vice president of Dimensional Fund Advisors, LP, where she oversaw investment operations. In this role, she established operations in new markets and managed vendor relationships for the company's non-US jurisdictions, including Europe, Latin America, Australia, and Canada. She's a recent graduate from the Executive MBA program at Berkeley-Haas, where she focused on entrepreneurship, including new venture finance and strategy, and that included telecom and media technology. She's very active in the community, including helping us here at Avion Ventures. She's on the board of ALPFA-LA, Alpha, and also on the board of the Haas-Berkeley Alumni Association. So welcome, Carmen. Thank you so much for being patient with our technical difficulties. You there? Oh, it looks like
I am here.
Yay. Great. So we're going to get started because I know people have been tweeting, texting, and emailing me just to see what's going on. But first of all, let's define what a startup is so that you can talk about the finance piece of it all. So a startup, according to Steve Blank, is a business that's looking to create a formula to be able to make something that's repeatable and scalable. So let's use an example of Snapchat or LearnVest or LinkedIn. Those were platforms that were created to be able to engage people in a particular way. And then they wanted to go from engaging 100 people to 1,000 people to 10,000 to 100,000. So every day they're bringing new folks, new clients, new business in through the door, new users through the door. And that's the way that it becomes repeatable and scalable. So having said that, because startups are very different from small business or corporate businesses, there is certain vehicles financially that are needed to be able to get the capital to go through this process. And that's what I want Carmen to talk about. So Carmen, why don't we talk a little bit about the different stages that startups go through?
Sure. And thanks for having me, Del. I'm very excited to join you on this call and talk about this topic. So first we'll start out with bootstrapping. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Yeah, and so, you know, before you get to a Snapchat or a LinkedIn or a Facebook, you're probably going to need some money to build your prototype. So that's typically pre-funding or bootstrapping. Some of the forms of bootstrapping are sweat equity. What does that mean? That means that if I am a business person or I have technical skills, that I am going to be doing all the work and I'm going to get paid nothing. That is my hard sweat and tears going into it. Another form of bootstrapping is savings, where I'm just pulling money straight out of my savings account. Some people will also use credit cards as a way to finance their prototype and bootstrapping stage. And I actually have one friend, a classmate of mine, who is taking out a loan against her condo to help build out her prototype.
Wow, that's great. So let's delve a little bit into bootstrapping, because I think there's a lot of myths and misconceptions around this phase about what it really means. So for one of the things that I always advise people is if you are not eating rice and beans 4 days a week already, then you need to start doing that while you have a job. So that when you actually have to do that, it does not feel like you're making a sacrifice, or it does not feel like it's hard on you. Finding ways in which you don't spend as much money so that you can actually have more time doing what it is that you need to. So could you give us an example like that you can think of what bootstrapping actually requires?
Yeah, and those are, that's great advice that you were giving to people. You're definitely going to have a significant amount of money, not just to build the actual product that you want to build, but also to fund some other startup expenses. For example, when you do break out on your own, and you don't have the benefit of medical or health insurance, you're going to have to fund that yourself. But there's also other things that you're going to have to cover. It's, business licenses, taxes, things that have
Oh, you cut out there a little bit. Let's wait for Carmen to come back on.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Did you get that last part?
Yeah, the taxes, licenses,
Okay.
insurance for the company itself. So not just for yourself. That's a great point. So after bootstrapping, what do you think? So you have a prototype that's already built. And now you're on to the next stage. You're actually trying to acquire customers. You're trying to acquire, users. What are some of the methodologies around financing right there?
Yeah, so, in that stage, you might want to consider some newer platforms that are out there, such as crowdfunding. There's Starter, for example, Gizmo, that are out there, all where you can try sales. It's a great avenue because having a proof of concept, as investors like to say, it basically the market have a need for whatever product or service you're.
Alrighty, you just froze again. So really quickly, I have a question around this crowdfunding option. What is the goal of the crowdfunding? Is it to prove that your concept works? Is it to get money in? Is it a combination?
Let's see. I'm going to have to have you repeat that question.
No, just asking about crowdfunding. What's the main goal? Is it?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I would say there's different goals with crowdfunding, and different companies have been able to use it for different things. In some cases, they can use it as a marketing tool just to get the word out and build awareness for their product. But in other cases, you're actually trying to get some pre-order sales. If you do have a product like a new dog shampoo or something that you're trying to sell, or Pebble watch, which is a wearable, for example, that did pre-sales specifically on a crowdfunding platform.
Great. So now let's talk about the next stage, which is seed stage. What does that look like in terms of finance?
Yeah, so in terms of a seed stage, at this point you are starting to build some traction. So you've already proved that there is a market out there, that the technology around your product works. So in that case, when you're trying to actually launch, maybe manufacture your product, at that stage you are then looking at angel investors. And angel investors could be friends and family, or they could be strangers. And there's different types of angel investors as well. You have individuals and you also have angel groups. So all of those three types of angel investors, individuals, friends and family, and groups will have different motivations behind wanting to invest in your product.
Yeah. So can I do like a little cultural parentheses here, which is as Latinas, we make less money and we are more financially responsible for the folks around us. So, I really do not, I think for the most part, our ability to raise money from friends and family is limited. I know that I can't go out to my friends and family and ask them for $100,000. Like, that's not going to happen. If I ask my family for that, it's a no. Having said that, that's why I like crowdfunding, because I think crowdfunding allows you to go a little bit beyond. And I think that there's something there. I also think that angel groups in general is a great way to go, because then you're able to make connections and relationships with people. So can we talk, before we go on to like our next stage, can you talk a little bit, because this is the moment where you're actually interacting with investors, which is a very different sort of relationship. Can you talk a little bit about what's that relationship really like, and what is it that they want? How do they want it? What are the terms? That sort of thing.
Sure. And I'll make one comment with respect to friends and family. Even if you do have friends and family that have a lot of advice out there will warn against even accepting it, because you really want to keep your friends and family as friends and family. And typically friends and family, the investment expertise that I think is required to do due diligence on startup investing. So it gets a little complicated when you start to cross those lines. So in terms of individual angel investors and groups, there are definitely benefits with taking money from them. A few things that you should definitely, as a startup, be aware of or looking for is, what can an investor bring to the table? You should be looking for an investor that can add value or fill in some gaps that you might not have. So either they're able to open doors for you or make introductions to different partners or different companies or different manufacturers to get you good deals, or they have good business advice, or maybe they're a lawyer, or whatever their expertise is, it's something that can add value beyond just dollars.
So yeah, I think that that's a really great point. I say this often, and I actually brought down the bandwidth on my thing so that we have a little less issues. So I'm a little blurry. Sorry about that. I'm cartoonish. The point about that I think is important to make is that you're going to look for an investor not just for money. The money is important. Mm-hmm. The money pays bills. It keeps a roof over your head. It allows you to hire people and contract people. But the money is not the only end goal that you want, right? You want to have a relationship with someone that is in it for the long haul. I use the marriage metaphor a lot because I think a lot of people get that. You want to make sure you find the right person or persons that are going to enable you to get to the next level. So that's a really good point, which brings us now to, when you go from angel, the next step is what?
So the next step really is, and can I just, I'm going to step back for 1 second, because there is one form of capital that might apply that I didn't mention, and I think it's important to mention, and that's government grants. And I mention that because one of my classmates is actually right now applying for a government grant to fund his startup. So in his case, he actually has not sunny. He's really trying to find creative ways to get money. Government grant is they are available for development that is important to the government. So he is, for example, creating an application that is based and around internet security. So sorry, just but we can continue.
That's a great point, actually. I know somebody who's gotten a government grant, and it's enabled her to build out her platform. And the great thing about some government grants is that they give you an initial amount of money without taking any equity. And then if you raise an equal amount of money, they'll put even some more money without equity. So actually, before we go on to the next stage, could you actually define what equity means?
Yeah, so equity, actual shares in your company. So that's a ownership and a piece of your company that an investor will typically take in exchange for a financial investment.
Yeah, and what is the formula around how much equity do you give someone in exchange for investment and or some sort of other deal?
Yeah, and that will depend. It will depend on a lot of things. It will depend on the amount of risk that an investor is taking. So, for example, if you, Del, come to me with an idea of, something that you want to do, but you don't yet have a prototype, you haven't done interviews with customers, so you don't have product market fit, then there are huge risks in that type of investment. But you're asking me to put my money and your idea when I could take that money and put it into something else. So in that case, I am going to want a bigger percentage of equity and ownership in your company, because it's more, it's riskier. So it really depends, I would say, on the amount of risk is putting in, the amount of time, that next stage. So it really does depend.
Okay, great. So what's the next stage in terms of investment then after angel?
So after an angel investment takes place, then you're going to get into more of an institutional landscape. So by institutional, I mean professional investors. And that typically is where venture capital comes in, and where corporate and strategic venture firms will come in to play.
Right. So now that we know all these, the stages of investment as the stages of your startup grow, why don't we talk a little bit about the motivation that each one of the folks that are engaging with you along this process in terms of investment, what are their motivations? What is it that they want in exchange for giving you their money, their time, and sharing their expertise? So let's start, for example, at a bootstrapping stage. Should you be having conversations with investors, and what would be their motivation for engaging with you?
I think it's always good to have conversations with investors, with customers, and never lose sight of either. And again, you want to make sure when you're having conversations with the investors that they are aligned and have good market knowledge of your product or service. So it's definitely good to form those relationships early on so that you can begin to develop trust between each other. And you can get to know how you guys work together. Because as you mentioned, Del, when you get or when you take money from an investor, then you're going to have to start showing results. And that's a return on their investment.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point you're making. I think once again, going back to that metaphor of like you're engaged in a relationship, you're taking somebody's money, but you're not just taking the money and then moving on. You're taking that money and you're continuing to build on a relationship. So I think this is where something like personality matters, where background matters, where an understanding matters. You know, I know some investors that have very aggressive personalities, and if you're an entrepreneur that's an introvert, that might be difficult to work with. It might be easy to work with. It really depends on who you are, and I think that that's the part about entrepreneurship, is not just about building a great product when you have a startup, having more customers, but actually knowing who you are and what your limits are. So that's a great point also, that you should have relationships with investors from the get-go. They should also be able to see, as you grow along in the different stages, how you've grown, so that when you are ready to ask for money, they know where you're at, right? Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about crowdfunding. What would be the motivation for somebody to give you money for your crowdfunding campaign?
So if we're looking at, you know, there's many platforms out there that encourage listeners to look at. Our Crowd is one example of a crowdfunding platform that's based on crowdfund, but you know, they're going to kind of see what startups are doing and how they're investors, and so that, you know, two good platforms for crowdfunding purposes.
Yeah, you know, I've done, I think, one or two crowdfunding things, and the thing that I was always surprised is that sometimes people just want to help out, and this is an easy way of helping out. And that sometimes is the motivation. It's not for the perks. It's not like I want one more t-shirt, because honestly, I don't need any more t-shirts. But it's sometimes just to be able to say, I've helped somebody out and I've seen how they've gotten to the next level. So that's great.
Yeah.
So let's talk about.
And I would say it seems like the crowdfunding that you're talking about is more rewards based, mm-hmm. where you may get some sort of reward for contributing to the campaign. So like you said, it might be a t-shirt or a signed autograph, or actual product, where there's other platforms that are more focused on equity and debt. So I mentioned crowdfunder. Investors that invest in companies that are on the crowdfunder platform will actually get an equity stake in the company. So, you know, crowdfunder is a platform that really opens up a startup's product to just a wider, and the audience typically are investors with experience investing. So just going back, you know, in terms of angel investors and their expectations and how they differ from capitalists, angel investors typically are solo, and they're usually investing their own money, where venture capitalists are investing other people's money. So it's a lot different, and the motivations are very different when you're dealing with the two different types of investors.
Yeah. So what's the difference in the motivation between an angel investor and a VC investor?
So for a venture investor, they have boundaries. A typical venture fund is structured over the course of 10 years. And once they raise the fund, say they're raising a $100 million fund, they will invest heavily at part of that fund. So over the first 3 years, and then after that, they will potentially, depending on the investments they make, will do follow-on funding to help the companies that are succeeding and continuing to grow further. So they have that amount of return, financial return, that they have to pay back to their investors. And so they're bound by different expectations, where an angel investor, for example, is typically an individual. So they're investing their own money and are motivated by their desire to help the entrepreneur grow. They have perhaps a little more time. You know, they can invest for a longer period of time. They don't have the same constraints.
Yeah. Great. Well, I know we only have a couple more minutes, and I really want to thank you, Carmen, for your time. So Carmen Palafox from Propina, and sharing this. I don't know if you have anything else to add at this point that you want to just kind of close us out with.
I guess I would say that, you know, I think it's interesting to always be conscious and considerate of the investor that you're dealing with, and understanding that the investment that they're making into your company is a trade-off. And that money that they're investing could be invested somewhere else. And so that's important to keep in mind when you're developing, you're getting to understand your investor. An investor is really going to want to invest in and provide money to get a company to that next stage of growth. So when you think about an investment, you should think over the course of a specific time period, whether it's weeks, months, or years, and then you should measure that against a specific metric. So it's how are you showing them that there's a return on their investment? Is it the number of active users on your platform, or is it revenue? And you know, you will have to continue to show that there is that growth based on that metric over time.
And different investors want different metrics, or do you try to make sure that all the investors you bring in are looking at the same metrics?
Definitely try and align your the same metrics so that it's very clear and you're not juggling different balls. But investors will definitely have different metrics that they're interested in. So, you know, for example, Twitter is in the media because they're not growing in terms of users. So what's an important metric to them would be the number of active users on their platform. Not necessarily the revenue of a company, but the number of users. So it's important when you're talking to investors to really understand how they're going to measure your success.
Great. So last but not least, because we didn't go into it a little bit earlier, but we had talked about doing this, let's define what a term sheet is and what is a term sheet supposed to look like. So at every stage of investment, this is one of the ways in which you can organize the money coming in, but also the expectations going out. What should a term sheet look like?
Oh, a term sheet is complicated. And there's so many different terms that are included within that agreement that talk about the percentage equity that someone is going to get in return for the money they're investing, the number of board seats that they're going to get in return for the number or the dollar amount they're investing. I think that those are the two important ones because they relate to financial incentive and they also relate to power, right? So as you take on money, there are certain investors that are going to want to have a legal say in the direction of your company, and the way they do that is through. So I would say those are the two important terms, but there are so many other terms that go into a term sheet based on the sophistication of an investor. So they get more complicated as you go and move towards venture capital because you get into preferred stock and liquidation preferences and straight and participating shares. So all of those terms are really meant to protect the investor's percent of ownership in your company, right? As the company grows, as they take on more investors, the percent ownership of each investor before that new money comes in gets diluted down. So, so there's a lot of provisions that go into a term sheet that to protect existing owners' percent ownership of the company.
Yes, but as the shares get diluted, the company also gets larger. So that's the other part that I think is important to mention there, is that you're not just diluting to dilute, you know, getting smaller, but you're diluting because the pie itself is growing larger. There's more people putting money and the company is growing itself. You're hiring more staff. You go from 10 people to 100, from 300, 400 to 1,000 people. That's what preferably it looks like. And then also the number of users, clients, whatever it is that you're doing also grows exponentially as you're bringing in people, which means that your revenues are going up.
Absolutely. You should, every move you make, every dollar that you take in, every piece of equity that you give away should result in a bigger pie. So that's the way you should look at it is, you know, if I am taking on this money, or if I am giving up more shares in my company, will it result in a bigger pie? And if the answer is yes, then you should green light. If the answer is no, then you should definitely think about it twice.
Great. And I think with that, we're going to end. Carmen Palafox, thank you so much for this conversation. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties earlier on, but I'm so glad you were able to join us in our Avion Tech School, our first of our many Google Hangouts. If you go to our G+ page, you will see the next ones that are coming up with Ruby Sanchez, CEO of Cooncam, and Lydia Aydemonke of co-founder of Sabio.la. I'm really excited to have them on board. Also, we are going to be doing a series more on legal and other vehicles, and as well as the technical issues of building a startup. So thank you so much for your time, Carmen, and I will be in touch with you soon.
Great, thank you.
No problem. If people want to reach out to you, how can they find you?
Carmen@goodpropina.com.
Great. And you're also on Twitter, I know, and also on Google+. So thank you so much, Carmen.
Yes.
We will be talking. Take care. Goodbye, everybody.
Okay.